Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar from Dr. Ehrenstorfer on global VOC standards to address a volatile global problem. My name is James Sizer and I'm the Senior Global Brand Manager for Dr. Ehrenstorfer here at LGC. And I'm very happy today to be joined by John Points, who is an expert in analytical science and is an independent consultant, and he will be delivering today's presentation to you. I'm also joined by John Wong, who is the Global Product Manager for Dr. Ehrenstorfer, who will be available at the end to answer any questions on the Dr. Ehrenstorfer portfolio of VOC standards and how we can support anyone's needs. Just a very quick moment to introduce Dr. Ehrenstorfer. I'm sure most people are very familiar with our work, but we are part of the LGC family and we are a high quality provider of reference materials to the food, beverage and environmental testing industries. We deliver a range of over 8,000 reference materials, the majority of which are actually accredited under our ISO 17034 accreditation. We are very, very proud to work with a number of you on your own science for a safer world, which is all very much part of the LGC mission. So there'll be a little bit more about us towards the end, but just a quick little bit of housekeeping. Today's presentation will be delivered by John Points in just one moment, and at the end there will be an opportunity to ask questions. I will put a quick note in the chat box towards the end of this presentation which will explain how to do that, but in the meantime, if you do want to ask questions, please use the chat box to enter your question, and then in the drop down menu below that, please select send question to staff, and we will seek to address as many questions as is reasonable at the end of this presentation. So in the meantime, for the next 25 minutes to 30 minutes, it's my pleasure to hand over to John Points, who will be taking us through today's presentation on global VOC standards to address a volatile global problem. Over to you, John.
Thank you, James, and for the opportunity to talk to you today. So as James said, my name's John Points. I'm an independent consultant based in the UK. So volatile organic compounds are a very wide topic, and today I'm going to introduce why they're a concern and then talk a bit about testing methods, focusing on testing products and on testing in the environment and industrial emissions. I'll also talk about some key things that laboratories need to consider when selecting or optimizing their test methods. And then, as James said, at the end there'll be some time for questions and answers. So what are volatile organic compounds, or VOCs? Well, for a literal definition, the clue's in the name. They're volatile and they're organic. If you look in a dictionary, you'll find a volatility definition in terms of their vapor pressure or their boiling point. The World Health Organization takes this literal definition. But in general, VOCs aren't a concern just because they happen to have low boiling points. It's the harmful effects that concern us, not the volatility. And so you find there are subtly different definitions of what a VOC is, depending on who's defining it and which harmful effect they're interested in. They tend to be related to either outdoor or inside air quality, the two areas I'm going to focus on today. But there are other specific VOC areas I'm not going to cover today, like explosion risks in industrial settings. The main and most obvious effect is in our worsening outdoor air quality, particularly in big industrialized towns and cities. This is nothing new. Chemical smog's been a problem since the 19th century, and campaign groups calculate it now causes over 6 billion deaths a year worldwide. The photoionization reactions that cause smog are incredibly varied and complex, but they have been known and studied for decades. So this example for toluene is from the 1970s. They all involve VOCs reacting with free radicals from ozone, which in turn comes from sunlight-driven reactions of pollutants, including VOCs, but also things like nitrous oxides from exhaust fumes. In extreme cases, the results in acerbic chemical soup, and it's a huge problem in some of our major cities. So this leads to the outdoor air quality definitions, which all fundamentally define a VOC as any chemical involved in atmospheric photoionization reactions. Different authorities have slightly different definitions, mainly varying by the list of substances that are excluded. And the US Environmental Protection Agency definition here is fairly typical. Whichever country's definition you take, though, VOCs are a global problem. Industrial pollution doesn't stay put, it spreads around the planet. And just because VOCs are volatile doesn't mean they're not persistent. Some are extremely persistent in the environment. Land and water that are contaminated with VOCs act as a huge pollution reservoir, storing atmospheric pollution for the future. VOC contaminants have been detected virtually everywhere in the world, from virgin rainforests to the polar ice caps. The other main focus is air quality within buildings and vehicles. And again, this is not a new issue. There's an example here of a report from 1992 and a very similar report from just last month. Not much has changed in 27 years. So if you're listening to this from an urban area, the chances are that you will spend over 80% of your time on this planet, either indoors or inside your car. And modern rooms are getting smaller, they're more energy efficient, but so less well ventilated, and packed with things that give off VOCs. Carpet adhesive, perfume and cosmetics, computers, cleaning products. The list's almost endless. So a couple of quick examples. First, limonene. Now, this is the terpene that's used as a lemon scent in everything from air fresheners to global brands of bathroom cleaner. And it sounds pretty innocuous. It's even a food flavouring. So would this be of indoor concern, outdoor concern, or neither? Well, as you can probably guess, it's not considered an outdoor VOC. Levels are low and would just blow away. But it's a different matter indoors. Limonene does react with ozone and gives some pretty nasty byproducts. And you find ozone inside cars, but it's also given off by laser printers and photocopiers. There's been quite a lot of research on the interaction of limonene and office laser printers. Next one, pyridine. It's not used in such quantities these days because of its toxicity, particularly its effect on sperm, but it's still an important industrial feedstock for lots of processes. Hopefully pyridine's no longer used in household products though, so it sits firmly in the outdoor category. Industrial spills and leaks are pretty disastrous, and we're still dealing with legacy pollution from decades past. Final example, dichloromethane, which is a common industrial solvent, and those of you who work in a lab will know it's a common laboratory reagent too. And until quite recently, dichloromethane also had an indoor use in paint and enamel strippers. Now this gets into the realm of acute toxicity rather than just photoionization reactions. There have been deaths around the world from breathing in dichloromethane fumes. It overlaps with workplace safety because both householders and professional decorators and strippers have been affected. Dichloromethane strippers are now banned in many countries, but it's still highly contentious in some areas, especially in the US, where they've only just been banned for household use and are still allowed for professional use. So for now, it still overlaps both categories, although I can see inside use being completely phased out over the next few years. In terms of sampling and testing, even this simple classification of indoor and outdoor gives a lot of areas of interest, and each has got their own protocols, terminology, and issues. I'm just going to talk about 3 areas today. So those that have an impact on indoor air quality, VOCs in consumer goods and construction materials, which are both regulated and tested in a very similar manner. and the environmental testing that underpins outdoor air quality controls. In terms of indoor air quality, there's a fair bit of overlap between a consumer exposure and occupational exposure, and it's not always sensible to try and draw a line. Amongst consumers, there are always higher exposure groups and circumstances, but this might also be someone's job. For example, there's been studies on the VOC exposure of American highway patrol officers, but some consumers also spend a lot of time sitting in their cars with air fresheners dangling. To protect consumers, limits can either be set for VOCs in the air itself or for maximum concentrations in the goods and products where they originate. In some cases, these limits are in terms of total VOCs, without caring which particular compounds are present. For example, total VOCs might be defined as the sum of all peaks that elute within a retention window of a particular GC column. But in other cases, individual limits are given for individual compounds. And this presents some quite different analytical challenges and approaches. Different regions and different industry areas have their own regulations, limits, and corresponding test methods, but there is a fair degree of standardization. Most of the US, for example, and many other countries adopt the Californian state regulations on VOC contents in consumer goods as de facto industry limits. There are no globally agreed limits or definitions, though, and this means that analysts need to be very clear what specification they're testing against if they're going to report something as non-compliant. For example, low VOC is a common label on tins of paint these days. But what does it mean? Well, it varies. In the EU, when the Paints Directive was first issued, a lot of manufacturers just used low VOC to mean that their paint had less VOCs in it now than it used to. In effect, that it was legally compliant. But legally compliant doesn't make for quite such a punchy marketing claim as low VOC. These days, there are official kite marks, but they vary. As I said, I'm in the UK, so my paint tins use the British Coatings Federation kite mark, which defines low VOC as less than 80 grams per litre. But if I lived in California, then the South Coast Air Quality Management District rules would apply, and a low VOC kite mark would mean my paint had to have less than 50 grams per litre. So how do you go about testing with VOCs? Now I'm going to section this two ways, product testing and environmental monitoring, which could cover both outdoor industrial emissions and pollution and indoor air quality. Product testing now means much more than just regulatory compliance. Retailers in particular are looking to check that their own label goods actually meet all of their on-pack and marketing claims. In Europe, this has been driven by some high-profile mis-selling and mislabeling scandals, primarily in the food industry. Now, I don't know if we have any Russian speakers online today, but there is an old Russian proverb, trust but check, which is famously quoted by both Stalin and Ronald. But this is the new mantra of own label goods retailers. They're commissioning more and more testing. Now, this testing for VOCs in products, whether consumer goods, furnishings, or construction materials, is dominated by the use of standard methods. And by a standard method, I mean one that's been inter-laboratory validated and then reviewed, accepted, and published by an official body, usually either a governmental or international standardization committee, such as ISO or ASTM for petroleum products. And standard methods are often referenced in law, meaning that if you're enforcing that particular law, then you have to use them. That's the case with the examples shown here. For example, the EU Paints Directive says that the testing lab must use either ISO 11890 or the ASTM method, depending on the composition of the paint. But even when standard methods aren't prescribed by law, In effect, they're so common that they become de facto industry standards. Environmental monitoring is itself a vast field, particularly when you include indoor air quality. The classic picture, and still by far the most common testing application, is testing industrial emissions from smokestacks or effluent to ensure that factories comply with their licensing conditions, or testing the contaminated land that can act as a global VOC reservoir. But there are other testing needs, as diverse as trace contaminants in the polar ice caps to checking the air quality in beauty salons. But even more so than product testing, environmental testing is a field where standard methods absolutely dominate. And some countries, notably China, have their own national standard methods, but easily 80% of laboratories around the world use the US EPA methods. And there are close similarities between the EPA methods and other national standard methods. Certainly if you're in the US, you have to use EPA methods. They're written into law. Even in non-US regulations, EPA methods are often specified by local licensing authorities. And the EPA methods are modular, and there's a method for pretty much any type of test sample you can think of. This is just a selection of the more popular methods from the menu. Probably the most common one is 624.1, purge and trap, which is one of the methods referenced in the Code of Federal Regulations for wastewater. Now you can see why licensing authorities or laboratories tend to choose EPA methods, even when they're not in the US or not legally required to do so. EPA methods are so widely recognized and trusted, they're often seen as the only show in town and just adopted by default. All of the various VOC test methods, whether in-house or standard methods, whether for products or for environmental testing, share some common features. The most obvious one is the need for a sorbent trap. This is whether trapping the volatiles coming out of a chimney, taking an air grab sample, taking a purge and trap sample from a liquid, or just concentrating the volatiles released from a product sample before they go onto the GC column. Although there's a lot of science behind the development of the sorbent materials, the choice tends to be quite standardized, with some well-known brands dominating the field. But different sorbents, or mixtures of sorbents, are better for different boiling ranges of VOCs. So it's something that laboratories need to think carefully about. Now, the reference shown at the bottom here is one of many you can look at for more guidance. The other obvious commonality is capillary GC. It's not only the ideal technique to separate and measure hundreds of volatile compounds. Until recent HPLC advances, it was the only technique. Most standard methods use the same type of non-polar GC stationary phase. The EPA methods and methods like EN 16516 for construction materials use 5% phenol columns. ISO 16000, the method for indoor air, uses 100% methyl polysiloxane. There is a bit more variation in detectors, although mass spectrometry is really the industry standard now because of its almost universal scope, its selectivity and sensitivity. But the one area where MS falls down is when VOCs are expressed as the sum of all integrated peaks within a retention time window. This type of measurement assumes an equivalent, or at least consistent, detector response to each peak. Whereas for MS, the response not only varies by compound, but also the relative response changes depending on the tuning conditions and the cleanliness of the source and pre-filters. So for this type of application, FID gives a much more consistent and robust measurement. Now, I've mentioned standard methods a couple of times. The alternative regulatory approach to requiring that labs use standard methods is to allow labs to use whatever method they want, but to specify minimum performance characteristics that the method must meet, either in law or in binding guidelines. This is the approach taken in the EU, for example, for pesticide and veterinary residue analysis. Now, there are pros and cons to both approaches. The obvious advantage of a standard method is that it's already robustly validated. It's important to remember this does not mean a lab can just pick up a standard method and use it. It still needs to be verified in their hands, and they need to document this verification plan, run experiments using high-quality reference materials, write a report, and accept it. But this process is far less onerous than validating a method from scratch. The other clear advantage of standard methods is the transferability of technology from one laboratory to another, and the practical and economic benefits of standardizing everything from consumables and reference materials to analysts' training. The disadvantage is that standard methods are slow to develop, validate, agree, and publish. Despite best efforts, a codex method can take over 5 years to get published. But I've also got a slightly more philosophical concern that's much more difficult to quantify or substantiate. I worry that standard methods will eventually encourage a tick box mentality amongst regulators and labs. With everybody testing for the same things in the same way, who's going to find the new unexpected problems or realise there's been a bias or gap in the method scope that nobody had appreciated? One final point on standard methods. Some use different ways of expressing results, and this means you can't always compare VOC results from one method to another. And the best example is probably for construction materials. So most methods quantify all of the VOCs against toluene, but in Germany, the most toxic VOCs must each be quantified against their own individual traceable reference standard. So, given that laboratories are usually constrained by using standard methods, what other aspects are left for them to consider? Well, actually, quite a lot. One is how to source their reference standards. These clearly need to be fully traceable if laboratories are accredited, and standard methods absolutely lend themselves to buying off-the-shelf pre-mixed solutions of all the analytes listed in the method, certified at the relative concentrations needed. Of course, in theory, it would be cheaper in the long run to buy neat standards and make up the mixtures yourself. But I'm not sure how many labs could really imagine doing this for things as difficult to store and handle as VOCs. It's likely to be a false economy. It would only need one mistake, and the amount that you'd saved would be wiped out by the waste. So most laboratories buy pre-mixed reference standards, like the Dr. Ehrenstorfer range, that are matched against specific EPA or Chinese standard methods. Other than the analyte lists, a lot of standard methods aren't as prescriptive as laboratories think. There's actually a huge scope for optimization, provided that you can verify that your own variant gives equivalent performance. For example, look at EPA 8260, which is their method for the GCMS detection of VOCs. Should you use splitless, or on-column injection? Well, actually, you can use any, although most laboratories default to splitless, and at quite a wide range of allowable temperatures too. When it comes to the column, you might expect this to be more rigidly tied down, but actually the phrasing is just that the columns listed in the method have been found to be suitable. Equivalents can be used if they give the same performance, and the carrier gas can be either helium or hydrogen, which chromatographers will know can give quite different retention and elution orders. But it's when it comes to the mass spectrometer that the field really becomes wide open. Basically, you can use anything as long as it meets the required performance characteristics. This part of the method isn't really standard at all. The default is quadrupole with electron ionization and selected ion monitoring. But you can also use chemical ionization, or full scan acquisition, or triple quadrupole, or even high-resolution mass spectrometry. Ion traps mentioned as a specific option, but even time of flight isn't ruled out. This flexibility is an excellent way of future-proofing the method, but it's also a great opportunity for laboratories to really tailor the method to their own type of samples and their own expected VOC concentrations. It's an opportunity that too few laboratories take. Most just stick with the default conditions. The aspects of standard methods that are absolutely fixed tend to be the analyte lists and the way that the controls and calibrations are run. Things like the calibration range, the number of blanks, spike samples, and by spiked I mean control samples fortified with a traceable amount of a reference standard of each analyte being measured, injection sequences, and the way of calibrating and calculating results. Now, I won't inflict you with the famous video of Donald Rumsfeld talking about his unknown unknowns, but it does go back to the same point, that if everyone's looking for the same things in the same way, then who's looking for the unexpected? The aspect that is very firmly within the analyst's control is the control of cross-contamination. Now, this is a real issue with VOC analysis. You're testing for trace levels of something that is, by its very nature, highly mobile and can be almost everywhere in the laboratory environment, particularly if it's a lab that does other testing than just VOC analysis. Most of this other testing will use solvents, the very thing that the VOC analyst is trying to completely eliminate from their environment. And many VOCs are also the very compounds that are present in plastics, as small molecule additives, residual monomers, or contaminants. And they can easily leach out of consumables, seals, and fittings. And once they're in the laboratory atmosphere, VOCs could absorb onto the inside of unused glassware and equipment. So you find that VOC analysts have to become self-taught experts on aspects of laboratory operations that other analysts just take for granted. They know how the air circulation system works, what the airflows are, how the gas lines are constructed, what cleaning products are used in the offices next door, and the specifications of everything from chromatography vials to gloves and hand wash. So this means just because laboratories use standard methods doesn't mean they're guaranteed to get comparable results. Proficiency testing schemes quite often show a wide variation from different laboratories testing the same sample, like this LGC scheme for BTEX solvents in water. And taking part in such schemes is another way of laboratories verifying method performance in their own hands. So in conclusion, VOCs are a global problem which can only be addressed if regulatory control is supported by laboratories that appreciate the context of what they're doing and are able to choose a method that matches that customer needs. For laboratories, this is a good time to review your own approach. Have you used a standard method just by default rather than because you have to? If you are using a standard method, could you optimize it for your own circumstances? Or are you working in an area where it might be worth supplementing it to occasionally test for things that are not on the standard lists? And remember, just because a method is standard does not mean it's plug and play. It still needs a verification plan to show that it works in your hands, including the use of high-quality reference materials. And you still need to be extremely careful about controlling the risk of cross-contamination. Addressing the global problem of VOCs needs collaboration between laboratories, industry, regulators, and providers of quality control and measurement tools. So I'd like to thank you for listening today, and I'm going to hand the microphone back to James Sizer now. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. and I hope everyone found that to be an insightful and useful presentation. I have just put a note in the chat box to say that to submit a question, please type into the chat box and then select send question to staff from the drop down menu and press send, and that will be collected, and I will be answering as many questions as I can and forwarding the questions onto the relevant parties on the call. So just very quickly, I just wanted to say that there is some further reading available. So, for instance, this presentation is in part based upon a white paper authored by John called "The Global VOC Standards to Address a Volatile Global Problem." So please do read that webinar, that white paper, which is available as a handout attached to this webinar. In addition, it is also available online at lgcstandards.com. And if you browse the resource section of that website, you will also find a number of other Dr. Ehrenstorfer white papers. We have also prepared a VOCs dedicated brochure under the Dr. Ehrenstorfer brand. I'd like to call your attention to this one because, in particular, if you are testing for VOCs in any capacity, this brochure is organized by analyte. So you can define your needs by analyte, and then you can select the relevant products from the Dr. Ehrenstorfer range dependent on format. So for instance, if we offer a neat or a single solution or a mixture for that particular analyte, it will be available there and hyperlinked as well. So you can simply click on the products most suitable for your testing and we will take you to the right place. For more information on Dr. Ehrenstorfer and the work that we do as part of the LGC family and how we support you in your own science for a safer world, please also visit lgcstandards.com/Dr. Ehrenstorfer, where you can browse our range of over 8,000 reference materials for the food, beverage and environmental industries, but also learn a bit more about our brand, our various offerings in terms of thought leadership. So we spend a lot of time working on white papers and staying up to date with all the latest regulatory trends so that we can best support you in your work. This is the opportunity to ask any questions. Please do so, as I mentioned before, by using the chat box and selecting send question to staff and hitting send. I will allow for a minute or two to collect that, and that would be great, and I will make sure that we can answer it to the best of our ability. Okay. No questions at the moment, but please don't be shy and please do submit any questions you might have, whether it's regarding our range or specifically for VOC testing in general, because John is online and ready to answer any questions. Okay, at the moment there are no questions coming in directly, but one thing I would say is that if you visit lgcstandards.com and you go to the Contact Us page, what you'll find there is access to our local offices. One of the benefits of being part of LGC's global network is that we have teams available all over the world that can help to support any customer needs, whether it's in local language, in English, pretty much anything that you need, we can certainly help with. Similarly, you can always email any of us, and please do also interact with us on social media. If you are a part of the community on LinkedIn or on Twitter, please search for Dr. Ehrenstorfer, or indeed look for the profiles under @Dr. Ehrenstorfer, and you will find us. And that's where we share a great deal of our material and our latest stories. And we do have one question from Samuel, so thank you, Samuel. I'm just saying, does LGC have a priority list of VOCs? John, do you want to answer that question?
Oh, hi. I don't believe we have priority list of VOCs, but we are very focused on looking at tackling the regulatory methods in different regions. For example, we have methods, mixtures, standard mixtures that are suitable for the EPA methods. And also we got standard mixtures that are suitable for the GB and HJ methods that are for the Chinese standards.
Thanks, John. That's great. And I would just say, I mentioned our VOCs brochure earlier, and if you do go to that that document online, what you will find is a series of the very top analytes. So it's not necessarily a priority list of VOCs, but what it is that does summarize the most common analytes in VOC testing at the moment and the products that support that testing. So Samuel, I hope that answers your question. Again, if you do have any more specific questions or needs in that area, Samuel, please do contact your local office or any of us online, whether it's through social media or on our website. Thank you. So we have another couple of minutes for any questions if anyone else would like to submit anything. As mentioned, if you are not interested in submitting a question in this slightly high profile and pressured environment, then please do contact us directly. We take great pride in working very closely with customers, so we really look forward to supporting you and your needs. Just a quick mention, in the world of VOCs, we have Dr. Ehrenstorfer has an extensive range of VOC reference materials, the majority of which are accredited to ISO 17034 for guaranteed traceability, etc. But also, if we don't have exactly what you need, we also have a custom reference material capability, as well as a relationship with a number of specialist providers, so we can ensure that we support your needs, whatever they may be, and no matter how specific they may be. So I suppose at that stage, if there are no further questions at this exact moment in time, I would just like to say, before I do so, I've had a quick couple of questions, so I will try and get to those. Thank you, Yvonne, for your question, which was, it was mentioned that there is a fixed calibration range for VOCs. What range would that typically be? John Points, would you be able to speak to that?
Yes, it's going to go back to the if it's from a standard method, it's back to the standard method itself, and it will give you the calibration range and the calibration points, and also probably as far as the injection sequence as well, and so be quite specific about how you need to calibrate. So the answer it will be within the published method. Sorry, does that answer the question?
Thanks very much, John. Yeah, so ultimately, yes, I think so. I think ultimately it is a case of returning to the method to double check that fixed calibration range.
Yeah, so it varies depending on which method you're using.
Great, thank you. And Yvonne, one thing I would say is that when it comes to things like reference materials, but also any other support for the analytical testing, including proficiency testing, please do get in touch with your local LGC representative or office, because they'll have quite a detailed way of responding to specific method needs as well. We have another question here from Christian saying, we work with portable GC analyzers. Is it possible to have a multi-compound VOC to calibrate our instruments that's less than 10 kV by PID? John, are you able to speak to that at all? John Wong?
Oh, hi, Christian. I'm afraid I don't have the answer for that, but if you want to send the question to us later, we'll try to find out as soon as at our best capacity.
Yeah, no problem. Christian, so I've got a quick note of your inquiry there. So what we will do is we will double check on that, and we can contact you directly to support you. I think if it is not possible to do that, we will be able to point you in the right direction. But certainly I would hope that we're able to support that specific need. Another quick question, which is what are the common contaminants found in VOC labs? John Points, are you able to speak to that one?
Yes, so probably the main one is solvents. If you're working in a laboratory that other activities are going on in the same building, they quite often use chlorinated solvents and the like, and solvents for the perhaps used as carriers in cleaning products around the laboratory. You know, if you have a contract cleaning company who comes in and polishes the floor or something like that. And then, as I said in the presentation, small molecules from plastics and liners and seals. So it could also be even things like semi-VOCs, so things like phthalates and plastic, but also monomers like vinyl chloride or something like that. So effectively, you buy consumables that are specified to have low degrees of leaching and to not have these types of problems in them.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much. Hopefully that helps with a little bit of guidance there. We've also been asked how long gas standards will last after opening. Are we able to speak to that one? I think that's probably a John Wong question.
Yes, thanks, James. Our shelf life of our standards varies differently. So I would ask the customer to refer back to the certificate of analysis that was specified the shelf life or the shelf life and the expiry date of the particular batch.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, so I think, again, it's always a good idea to refer to certificates of analysis, which can always be found on our website, as well as obviously accompanying our products. We, as a general rule, Dr. Ehrenstorfer tries to ensure the very best in expiry dates and shelf lives. So we would expect all of our products to maintain our high standards in that area. We have also quickly been asked if we have a local agent in West Africa. So again, Samuel, I will have a quick look into that. But if you go to lgcstandards.com/contact us, you can actually fill in a form that we will take care of making sure that you speak to the right person. So by all means, just enter that and tell us your contact details, and we will make sure that the best possible and most appropriate agent will speak to you. But certainly we do work with various customers in West Africa. So the answer is most definitely yes, we can support you and your needs. So please drop us a quick line through our website and we'll make sure the most appropriate person gets back to you very quickly. We are just about out of time. So as mentioned before, if you do have any further questions, please do contact us directly. We love being contacted through our website, through our social media, and of course through our local agents all over the world. We are very much part of the LGC family. So for instance, if you have an existing relationship with LGC in any capacity, then please feel free to speak to your representatives and indeed us about all things Dr. Ehrenstorfer also, and of course specifically VOCs. So at this stage, I'd just like to say thank you very much everyone for attending. We do hope you found it very useful, and we do hope that we can help you in your current and future needs. I'd just like to say a big thank you to John Wong for his contributions and in answering questions on our products. And finally, of course, thank you very much to John Points for presenting today. I hope everyone has found it extremely useful. Everybody that's registered for this webinar will receive a download copy of the recording. So if you missed anything or you want to listen back, then you will be very much able to do so. Please look out for any further future webinars from Dr. Ehrenstorfer and indeed with our partner, John Points. So finally, thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day and week. Take care. Goodbye.